It all began on a freezing winter morning when a single father opened his cabin door to find a widow and her 4 children stranded in the snow. He had no idea that moment would rewrite the rest of his life. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey of resilience, love, and quiet miracles, if you believe in the power of kindness to change lives, consider subscribing. Stories like this one are made for hearts like yours. Now let's begin. The first snow arrived early that year, blanketing the Montana mountains in silence. As if the world were holding its breath, Jack Avery stood on the porch of his weather-worn cabin, hands in the pockets of his old flannel coat, watching the sky grow darker. The woods behind him were hushed, and the only sound was the soft hiss of wind weaving through pine branches. He hadn't seen a soul in days. The isolation used to comfort him. Since Lydia died, solitude was simpler, safer. No one to explain himself to. No one to watch him break. Then a distant noise, faint but wrong. Jack narrowed his eyes. Through the curtain of snow, he saw headlights cutting across the dusk, wobbling, then a crunch, metal against ice. The lights tilted unnaturally, then stilled. He grabbed his flashlight and coat and called for Bandit, the old dog limping faithfully behind. As he trudged down the icy path, boots crunching the wind, bit into his skin like it had a warning to deliver. At the bend in the road, he found the SUV. It had slid off the shoulder, wedged against a snowbank. The engine was off. Inside, silhouettes moved, a woman in the driver's seat, and what looked like children packed into the back. Jack knocked on the glass. The woman startled, but cracked the window cautiously. "You all right?" Jack asked, keeping his voice low and calm. "We're okay," she said, eyes flicking nervously to the kids. "But the car died an hour ago. We were trying to make it down the mountain before the storm hit. You won't make it." "Now," he said, "not in this snow. I've got a cabin up the hill. There's heat. Come with me." She hesitated, searching his face. Jack knew that look, measuring whether he was a threat or a lifeline. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "But it's getting colder by the minute, and your kids are shivering." The youngest's face was pressed to the glass, cheeks, blotchy lips trembling. The woman nodded slowly. "Okay. Thank you." They bundled out of the car, 4 children in mismatched coats. Jack counted 2 girls, 2 boys, none older than 10. He didn't ask their names, just took the smallest one's hand and led them up the narrow trail. Rachel, that was the woman's name, walked behind them, steady but tired, carrying a small duffel bag over one shoulder. The climb was quiet, save for crunching snow and the occasional sniffle. At the cabin, Jack pushed open the heavy door, letting warmth and firelight spill into the dark. The children piled in, blinking at the sudden comfort. Bandit settled near the stove, thumping his tail softly. Jack brought out blankets, thick socks, even Lydia's old mittens. He didn't care anymore about who wore what. Survival came first. He added more logs to the fire and ladled soup from the pot he'd made for himself and Caleb. Rachel watched in silence, her eyes glassy with something deeper than cold. "You can sit," he told her. "I'll get the kids settled." But she moved with him, kneeling beside her. Youngest rubbing numb hands, whispering promises. It wasn't just exhaustion he saw in her. It was determination. A mother fighting to hold it all together with duct tape and willpower. He respected that. Later, when the children were asleep in a makeshift pile near the hearth, Jack found Rachel standing alone by the window, arms folded. "You want to tell me how you ended up out here?" he asked gently. She didn't turn. "I was heading for a job in Boise teaching music, but things didn't work out. I've been staying in shelters. This was supposed to be a new start, driving up a mountain in a snowstorm with 4 kids." She smiled faintly. "I didn't think we'd hit snow this early. We were desperate. That van's all we had. Jack nodded. He understood desperation, understood what it meant to carry something heavy without ever putting it down. He poured her a mug of tea, slid it across the table. "Thank you," she said softly. Jack shrugged. "You needed help. People don't stop anymore. Not like this." "Well," he said, meeting her eyes, "maybe we need to start again." From the corner, Caleb watched them both. He hadn't spoken a word since they arrived. He sat with his legs tucked under a quilt, his sketch pad on his knees, his only consistent language since his mother died. Rachel looked over. "Your boy, he's quiet. Hasn't talked in nearly 2 years, Jack said. Stopped after Lydia passed. I'm sorry." Jack nodded once. He listens, though, understands more than he lets on. Rachel's gaze lingered on the boy. He's got kind eyes. He gets that from his mom. Silence folded over them again, but it wasn't the same as before. Not hollow, not heavy, just. Still outside, the snow thickened. The world slowed. Inside, 5 children slept. A fire crackled, and 2 people who had nearly given up found themselves breathing in something fragile but real. Hope. The morning broke gray and sullen with frost crystals, feathering the windows like quiet warnings. Jack stood by the stove, stirring scrambled eggs made from a powdered mix, diced ham from a can, and a splash of condensed milk he'd been saving. Not a feast, but hot, and that mattered more than taste. Behind him, the once quiet cabin hummed with unfamiliar movement. Rachel moved through the space like someone trained by hardship. She guided her children with soft commands, quick hands, and the unspoken discipline of a mother who had spent many nights coaxing little bodies to sleep in borrowed corners. She didn't wait to be offered anything. She made herself useful. Jack noticed, at the far end of the table, Caleb sat, sketching again, his shoulders high and stiff. New voices, new footsteps, too many smells. Jack knew the storm in his son's mind was louder than the one outside. He set a plate beside the boy and murmured, "Eat when you're ready." Caleb didn't look up, but he reached for the fork. Jack exhaled almost imperceptibly. Rachel's kids, 4 of them, their names still unspoken, gathered around the table, devouring the food with quiet intensity. Jack watched them, 2 boys, 2 girls, all under 10. Yet none of them complained. That said more than words ever could. After breakfast, Rachel began tidying the kitchen as if it were her own. She rinsed dishes, wiped down the counters, and even straightened the curtains. Jack waited a moment before finally asking, "You don't have to do all that." She kept working. "I know, but it helps." Jack nodded slowly. He understood. Action was how people like them stayed afloat. Silence and waiting were dangerous. She paused only when she noticed the woodpile by the stove. "You're running low." "Storm came in faster than I expected," Jack said. "I'll cut more this afternoon. I'll help. You've got your hands full." She glanced at the children now trying to build a makeshift fort from quilts and firewood, and then back at him. "I've carried heavier." There was no boasting in her tone, just truth. Jack tugged on his boots and grabbed his coat. "I'm heading down the ridge. Mrs. Handley lives alone. She's pushing 90. Stove runs out, she freezes." Rachel nodded, unflinching. "Go. We'll be okay." "You sure?" Her eyes didn't waver. "I've lived through worse." Jack almost smiled, almost. When he returned, cheeks raw from the wind, and a fresh cut on his palm, something unfamiliar greeted him. Laughter. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of cinnamon and something sweet. Rachel stood at the stove, sleeves rolled flour on her nose, baking. The kids giggled as they circled Caleb, who remarkably was showing them his drawings. Jack's heart clenched at the sight. He caught Rachel's eye. "You turned this place into a bakery," she smiled genuinely. I found flour and baking powder in your pantry, and a tin of nutmeg that expired 10 years ago." "Still smells like Christmas," he muttered, removing his boots. Rachel handed him a warm slice of bread, or something close to it. He bit into it. It was imperfect, dense, a little burnt, but it tasted like effort, like care. "It's the best thing I've had in years," Jack said, honestly. Rachel wiped her hands. "I taught baking once. Before, I taught music." Jack leaned against the counter. "And before that?" She hesitated. "Before. That I was someone's wife, someone's daughter. Now I'm just trying to be someone my kids can follow." Her voice didn't shake, but something in it made Jack feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff that night after the fire dimmed and the children curled up in blankets near the hearth. Jack sat with Rachel at the kitchen table. The lamp glowed between them. She looked down at her mug. "We left Idaho 4 weeks ago. My husband died 18 months ago. Car crash. Sudden I tried to keep the house, but it went fast. Then the job in Boise disappeared." She looked up. "We were on the move since then. Shelter to shelter. Then this storm." Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to. "I don't want charity," Rachel added. "But I can't lie, last night I prayed we'd find somewhere safe. Somewhere kind." Jack stirred the tea between his hands. "You found a broken man in a wooden box." "Not much more." Rachel looked at him steadily. "You opened the door." Jack's throat tightened, then quieter. "I didn't pull you out of the snow, Rachel. You carried them here. I just lit the fire." She blinked, and then, for the first time since arriving, she laughed, a soft, brief, almost embarrassed sound. But it melted something between them. Jack looked at her. Really looked. Not as a stranger, not as a burden, but as someone who had survived the impossible and still kept her back straight, her voice steady, her children warm. And Rachel looked at Jack and saw not just a man in a cabin, but a father still carrying grief with both arms and somehow managing to keep his boy alive. That night, nothing romantic happened. No grand confessions, no touches exchanged. But when they each rose from the table, something had changed. They were no longer strangers. They were survivors, and for the first time in a very long time, Jack Avery didn't feel so alone. The snow didn't let up for 3 days. It fell like a soft curtain, erasing the horizon and slowing time itself. For most people, the storm would have been an inconvenience. For Jack Avery, it was strangely welcome. The world outside had stopped, and inside the cabin, something was quietly starting. He woke early on the 3rd morning, the sky still dark outside the frosted window. The fire had died down to embers. Caleb was still asleep under a patchwork quilt, curled on the edge of the couch. The other children were scattered like sleepy animals across the living room floor, bundled in layers of mismatched warmth. And Rachel, she was already awake, sitting near the stove with a notebook on her lap and a pencil in hand. Jack patted softly across the creaking floorboards. "You sleep at all?" Rachel looked up and smiled a little, but I remembered a few old recipes I used to teach my students. Figured I'd write them down before I forgot. "You taught home economics, food, music, some art. Small school? I wore a lot of hats." She closed the notebook and stood rubbing her hands together. "I'd like to try making biscuits this morning, if the flour hasn't turned to concrete." Jack gestured to the pantry. "What I've got is yours." It became a rhythm, simple, unspoken. Jack would split and stack firewood. Rachel would knead and bake. The children played, read, or helped as they could. Even Caleb, who typically drifted through days like a shadow, had begun to hover at the edge of the activity. Not speaking, not engaging, but watching. Jack noticed that morning, as he was splitting logs behind the cabin, he caught Caleb peeking from the back door, his arms wrapped around himself against the cold. "You want to hand me a piece?" Jack asked, not expecting much. To his surprise, the boy stepped forward, picked up a small log with gloved hands, and set it carefully on the chopping block. Jack didn't speak. He just raised the axe, let it fall clean through. Another log, another motion, another piece handed over. The rhythm grew. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was functional. A language all its own. When they returned inside, cheeks pink from the cold, the cabin smelled like something Jack hadn't smelled in years. Butter flour, something warm and hopeful. Rachel's biscuits weren't perfect. Some burned on the bottom, some doughy in the middle. But the effort meant more than the taste. "You made." These Jack asked. Rachel looked up, cheeks flushed, with help from the kids, and your son, apparently. Jack turned to Caleb, who quickly looked away, but his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but almost. They ate breakfast, crowded around the wooden table chairs, pulled in tight, elbows bumping. Someone dropped a spoon and laughed. Someone else, one of Rachel's boys, asked if there were more. Jack's cabin had never felt so full, and yet, not crowded, just alive. After breakfast, Rachel gathered the children for a reading session. Jack watched her from the corner as she animated each page, changed voices for characters, and drew out giggles from all 5 children, including, for the first time, a quiet chuckle from Caleb. Jack felt something stir in his chest. Not longing, not quite joy. Something quieter, like the first crack of sun through ice. When the kids scattered to play, Rachel joined him on the porch with 2 mugs of strong coffee. "They're happier here than they've been in months," she said. Jack looked at her, the way her breath fogged in the air, the way her eyes scanned the mountains like they belonged to her. "So are you," Rachel didn't deny it. "There's something about this place. It's raw, but it's safe." Jack sipped. "Safe is more than I've had in a long time." She looked at him, then, not just at his face, but into it. "How did you end up here, Jack?" He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "My wife, Lydia, she died. Breast cancer diagnosed. Too late. Gone too fast." Rachel's hand tightened around her mug. "After that," Jack continued, "I didn't know how to keep going. Caleb stopped speaking. I stopped playing. We came here where no one expected anything, where it was just us and the trees." Rachel's voice was barely audible. "And now, it's not just you." Jack nodded. "I know." They sat in silence for a long while, the snow gently falling again, as if trying to erase time, one flake at a time. That afternoon, Jack heard music. It was faint, just a few notes, uneven and unsure. He stepped into the main room and saw Rachel kneeling by the old upright piano in the corner. It hadn't been touched in years. One key was chipped, another flat, but she was coaxing something from it. Something simple and familiar. "You are my sunshine." The children watched from a distance. Caleb stood closest. When Rachel finished, she looked up. "Sorry," she said. "I couldn't help myself." Jack shook his head. "Don't stop." Rachel smiled and played again. This time, something miraculous happened. Caleb slowly took a step forward, then another. He stood by the piano, his hands twitching at his sides, and then, barely audible, his lips moved. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Jack froze. His heart stopped. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined it. But then Caleb sang the next line, and the next. Rachel's hands stopped on the keys. Tears welled in her eyes. Jack dropped to a chair, head in his hands, not crying, just overwhelmed. 2 years of silence broken by a song. He looked up to see Caleb glancing at him. Nervous, Jack stood across the room and pulled his son into a hug, so fierce it left them both shaking. Rachel turned away, brushing her cheek, giving them space. And Jack thought maybe the world hadn't ended when Lydia died. Maybe it had just paused. Until now. The next morning, light filtered through the frost-covered windows in pale gold. The fire had burned low in the hearth, casting long shadows across the worn cabin floor. But even before Jack opened his eyes, he knew something was different. There was a sound, faint, hesitant like someone breathing life into silence. Music. Simple broken chords floated through the air, the melody familiar but uncertain, like a voice relearning how to speak. Jack sat up slowly and followed the sound to the corner of the room where an old guitar leaned against the wall. He hadn't touched it in years. Rachel was holding it now, her fingers fumbling gently over the strings. She looked up as he entered, half smiling. "I found it under the bed," she said quietly. "I hope you don't mind." Jack shook his head, still waking into the moment. "I just didn't expect to hear it." Rachel looked down at the instrument. "It's a beautiful piece. Even if it's seen better days, it belonged to my dad," Jack said. "Passed it down to me. When I turned 18, I used to play every evening. Lydia and I would sit out back on the porch, just play and talk." He paused. After she died, it felt wrong to touch it. Rachel didn't respond with sympathy. She didn't need to. Her hands kept moving gently over the strings, tuning, adjusting, coaxing. "I understand," she said. "Finally, I didn't sing for almost a year after Dan passed. My kids would ask me and I just couldn't. Not even lullabies." Jack leaned against the wall watching her. "What changed?" Rachel smiled faintly. "One night my daughter had a nightmare. She cried until her chest hurt. I held her, and without thinking, I started to hum. Just the same old tune I used to sing when they were babies. She stopped crying. I kept humming." She looked at him. Sometimes healing doesn't ask for permission. It just sneaks in when you're too tired to resist. Jack didn't reply. He didn't need to. Later that day, while the kids helped shovel a path around the cabin, Rachel returned the guitar to its place but didn't cover it this time. Instead, she set it upright, cleaned its strings, and tucked a folded cloth beneath it. "Just in case someone feels like playing again," she said. Jack nodded, something tight in his chest, loosening just a bit. That afternoon, the snow gave way to sun cold and bright. Jack took the opportunity to chop more firewood behind the cabin. Rachel followed him outside, bundled in his old parka, carrying a thermos of coffee and her determined energy. "I'm helping today," she declared. "You've done enough already. 5 kids eat a lot," she said. "I'm just evening the scale." She grabbed the smaller axe and before he could argue brought it down cleanly on a thick round of wood. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You've done this before." "I'm from Minnesota," she said, tossing a split log into the wheelbarrow. "My dad made us earn our breakfast. They worked in rhythm for nearly an hour. Jack split. Rachel stacked. Neither said much, but in the quiet labor, something passed between them, a shared language made of sweat and breath muscle and persistence. At one point, Jack looked over and saw a strand of Rachel's hair fall across her cheek. She pushed it back with a gloved hand and smiled at him. Not the polite kind, but the kind that said, "You see me, I see you." And we're still standing. When they returned inside, flushed from the cold and dusted with snow, the cabin was alive with energy. The kids had built a reading fort by draping blankets between chairs and boxes, and Caleb was at the center of it, showing one of Rachel's boys how to draw a pine tree. Rachel touched Jack's arm gently. "He's coming back to you." Jack didn't answer right away. His throat was tight. "He's becoming himself again," she added. That doesn't happen without a safe place. Jack looked at her. I don't know if this place is safe. It's old. The roof leaks. We barely have enough. But it's warm, Rachel said. And kind. That's enough. Her words stuck with him all evening. After the kids were asleep, Jack wandered outside to the porch. The sky was clear, the stars sharp and endless above the trees. He heard the door open and close behind him. Felt the boards creak as Rachel stepped beside him. You always stand out here alone, she asked. Sometimes it's easier to think when the cold keeps you alert. Rachel folded her arms, gazing out into the darkness. I used to believe healing came from big things, doctors, jobs plans. But maybe it's just this, a fire that stays lit. Kids who feel safe enough to build a fort. A man who keeps splitting wood when no one sees. Jack looked over, and a woman who bakes from nothing and makes it taste like hope. Rachel's smile was soft. You ever think about starting over? All the time, Jack said. Then I remember how hard it is. She was quiet a moment. It's still hard, but maybe it's not impossible. They stood in silence, stars wheeling overhead, the air between them full of the things neither had said, but both had begun to feel. Jack finally spoke. You think the road'll open tomorrow? Rachel looked at him. Do you want it to? He hesitated. And in that pause, longer than it needed to be, they both knew something had taken root. Not love, not yet, but the undeniable beginning of something real. The next day dawned quietly, the kind of still morning that blanketed the world in breathless calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline hush. Trees were etched in frost. Smoke rose steady from the chimney like a flag of survival. Inside the cabin, Rachel stood at the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, kneading dough with purposeful hands. The children played softly in the next room, a fortress of pillows and laughter. Jack sat at the table sipping his coffee, watching her. The way she moved wasn't just efficient, it was resilient. Each motion deliberate, focused. Like the act of kneading wasn't just about bread, but about refusing to be undone. She caught his gaze and smiled faintly. I always bake when I don't know what else to do. It's working, he replied. That cinnamon loaf yesterday made me forget my back pain for a full 10 minutes. Rachel chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. That's the highest praise I've gotten all year. Jack hesitated, then set his cup down. Can I ask you something? She looked up. Sure, you said you left Idaho 4 weeks ago. What was the last thing you left behind? Rachel paused, fingers still buried in dough. Her eyes didn't flinch, but her voice softened. Our piano, she said. It was a wedding gift, an upright Steinway. Dan taught our kids to sing around it. We sold everything else, furniture tools, even my teaching certificates. But I couldn't let go of that piano. Not until the last day, Jack waited. There was this moment Rachel continued right before we drove away. I stood in the empty living room with that piano, and I played one last song, a hymn Dan used to hum when he thought I wasn't listening. I didn't cry when we buried him. Didn't cry when the bank took the house. But that moment, that got me. She looked up at Jack. Her eyes were bright but dry. I think it's not the big losses that break us. It's the small ones, the everyday things that feel like home. Jack leaned back in his chair. I used to think grief made us fragile, but maybe it just makes us real. Rachel gave a small, tired smile. It makes us human, that's for sure. A long silence settled, comfortable, not empty. Then Caleb entered the room holding a folded piece of paper. He hesitated before handing it to Rachel. She took it gently. Is this for me? The boy nodded once. Rachel unfolded the page, a pencil sketch, 5 figures standing outside a little cabin, the trees around them tall and snow-covered. One figure was clearly her hair tucked under a scarf. Another had to be Jack. Tall, with squared shoulders, the 5 children were scattered among them. 2 girls, 2 boys, and Caleb in the middle. Her voice caught. "This is beautiful." Jack watched, heart swelling. Caleb hadn't shared a drawing with anyone outside their 2-person world. In years, Rachel looked at the boy. "Thank you." Caleb shrugged, then turned and walked back to the living room. Jack's voice was low. "You're good for him." Rachel looked down at the drawing again. "Maybe he's good for me, too." Later that afternoon, while the kids napped and Caleb quietly flipped through a book near the fire, Jack took Rachel out to the woodshed. The snow had packed down enough to allow careful walking, and the path was bordered by high mounds glittering in the sun. The shed creaked as they opened the door. Inside was a wall of neatly chopped firewood, the product of long hours and a strong back. Rachel surveyed the pile. "This is impressive." Jack shrugged. "Therapy. The colder I feel, the more I split." She picked up a small log, testing its weight. "I get it. I used to scrub floors when Dan got sick. Not because they were dirty, just because Jack set an axe on the stump." Want a turn? Rachel didn't hesitate. She took the axe, adjusted her grip, and brought it down with a sharp crack. "Clean cut." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Minnesota really does breed them tough." She smirked. "We had to winter weed it out the lazy." They worked side by side, the sound of wood splitting echoing off the trees. The rhythm was soothing, like breath, like prayer. At one point, Jack paused and looked at her. "I haven't seen anyone stand this strong in a long time." Rachel stopped, wiped her brow. "I don't have a choice." He nodded slowly. "But you do. You could have waited at a shelter, asked for help." "Given up, I did ask for help," she said, locking eyes with him. "I just didn't expect it to come from someone chopping wood in the middle of nowhere." Jack chuckled. She went on quieter now. "I never wanted to be rescued. Jack, I just wanted a place where I didn't have to apologize for trying." He didn't speak, just met her gaze and held it. Then he said, "The only thing that felt true. You don't have to apologize here." Rachel's breath hitched barely, but she blinked it away. They returned to the cabin with new wood and silent understanding. That night, over a stew of canned beef potatoes and carrot scraps, the kids laughed louder. Caleb even rolled his eyes at a joke. One of the boys made a miracle in Jack's view. Rachel noticed it too. Her gaze met Jack's across the table, and for a moment, it was just the two of them. 2 parents, 2 survivors, 2 people who had stopped searching long enough to find something worth staying for. And somewhere deep inside, Jack felt the beginnings of a question he wasn't ready to ask. Not yet. But soon, by the end of the week, the snow had begun to settle into something less threatening. The worst of the storm had passed, and though the roads remained hidden beneath layers of white, the world no longer felt like it was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, routine had taken root. Jack rose before dawn to chop wood or repair the broken hinges on the barn doors. Rachel was usually already up by then, either preparing breakfast with the older kids or writing out ideas in her notebook beside the stove. Caleb, quieter but no longer invisible, had taken to sketching pictures of everyone, always with the cabin in the background. Like even he, in his silent way, knew this was becoming a kind of home. One morning, while Jack was wiping down his boots, Rachel set a tray of cooling cornbread on the counter and said, "I want to try selling these." Jack looked up. "To who there's a town at the base of the ridge, isn't there? Maybe a small farmer's market." He nodded slowly. "Occasionally, mostly locals." "Tough crowd," Rachel shrugged. "Tough, I can handle. What I can't do is keep taking from you without trying to give something back." Jack sat down, elbows on the table. "You're not taking. You've made this place warmer than it's been in years," She smiled. That's kind of you to say. But kindness won't buy more flour. Jack studied her face, the set of her jaw, the quiet fire behind her eyes. She didn't want charity. She wanted dignity, and he could respect that more than anything. I'll hitch the sled to the truck, he said. We'll make the trip together tomorrow. The next morning, with the sky overcast and the wind gentler, Jack drove Rachel and the kids down the narrow mountain road. The truck was old and temperamental, and Jack wasn't convinced they wouldn't have to push it halfway back. But they made it. The town was little more than a few blocks a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and the square, where vendors set up tables with handmade crafts, winter vegetables, or jars of preserves. Rachel laid out a small table with a red checkered cloth, neatly stacked loaves of her cinnamon cornbread spiced apple muffins, and 2 tins of ginger biscuits. The children sat behind her, bundled and smiling. Caleb stood off to the side with Jack, close but observant. At first, people passed by without stopping. One man gave them a skeptical glance and muttered something about out-of-towners. Rachel didn't flinch. She stood, tall, smiled at every passerby, offered samples, and answered every question with calm confidence. By mid-morning, a woman in a heavy coat tasted a muffin and raised her eyebrows. She called over her friend, then another. By noon, every loaf was gone. Jack watched from a distance, arms crossed over his chest, hiding a smile. As they packed up, Rachel's cheeks were red from the cold and from something else bright. The good kind. I forgot what this felt like, she said softly. Jack turned to her. Selling baked goods. No standing up and being seen. He looked at her, really looked, and wondered how long she had gone unseen before landing in his woods. They drove back in near silence, the children asleep in the back, and Rachel watching the trees with a gentle calm he hadn't seen in her before. That night, Jack lit a fire bigger than usual. The cabin glowed. Rachel counted the crumpled bills from the day and laughed, not because it was much, but because it was hers. Later, while washing dishes side by side, Rachel said, I think I could make a habit of this. Jack passed her a plate, the baking or the market. Both, maybe more. He didn't press her, didn't need to. But something in her voice curled up inside his ribs and stayed there. Over the next few days, the pattern deepened. Jack built a second drying rack for wood, repaired the cellar steps, and helped the kids fashion a snow sled from scrap timber. Rachel baked in batches, adjusted recipes, and began writing out a lesson plan, a habit she couldn't seem to quit. One evening after the children had gone to bed and the guitar had been returned to its quiet corner, Rachel asked, Why haven't you left here? Jack looked up from the fire. You mean the mountain? She nodded. You had a life before this music family. You could have gone anywhere. Jack stared into the flames for a long moment, because this place didn't ask me for anything. Out there, I couldn't be the man I used to be. But here, I could survive. Raise Caleb. Keep the roof from falling in. That was enough. Rachel's voice was quiet. What if surviving stops being enough? He turned to her. Her face was illuminated by firelight, her expression open and vulnerable. Then I'd have to learn how to live again, Jack said. And I don't know if I remember how Rachel didn't reply, but she reached out gently, took his hand, and placed something in it. It was a muffin, still warm, wrapped in cloth. Start with this, she said, a playful glint in her eyes. It's easier than love. Jack laughed full and low, the kind of laugh that hadn't left his mouth in far too long. And Rachel smiled, not because she had given something, but because she had gotten something back. Connection, understanding, and maybe the beginning of something that didn't have to be earned, just nurtured. Like bread, like trust, like love. If you're brave enough. The storm returned without warning. just as the roads had begun to thaw, and the days lengthened by a few precious minutes, a fresh wave of snow came barreling over the mountain. Ridge, thick, wet, and relentless. By noon, the sky had turned the color of lead. By nightfall, the world was white again, but inside the cabin it was warm. The fire crackled in the hearth. Rachel's latest batch of molasses. Bread cooled on the windowsill. Jack sat at the kitchen table, rubbing linseed oil into the wooden handle of his axe. While the children played quietly on the floor, Caleb was drawing again, legs tucked underneath him, eyes focused. Jack had grown used to the quiet companionship of his son's presence, the steady scratch of pencil on paper, the occasional flicker of curiosity when one of the other children laughed too loudly. But tonight, there was something different in the air. A hum, a tension not of danger, but of possibility. Rachel was sorting through old books, trying to catalog what was salvageable for a makeshift learning corner. At some point, she reached into a side drawer and pulled out a worn folder of sheet music. She smiled as she flipped through the yellowed pages. "Do you know this one?" she asked aloud, holding up a song titled, "You Are My Sunshine." Jack glanced over his heart. "Hitching ya," he said, quietly. That was Lydia's favorite. Rachel didn't press. She simply walked over to the upright piano, the one she had been quietly tuning over the past week, and sat down. The room grew still. She played the opening notes a little shaky at first, but steadying with each measure. Her voice, soft and husky from the cold, wrapped around the lyrics with something tender, not polished, not performative honest. Jack leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, the memories rising like steam from a forgotten kettle. Lydia swaying in the kitchen, Caleb in footy pajamas bouncing in rhythm, the sound of laughter, music, life. He hadn't realized how much he missed it until it returned, wearing a different voice. Then it happened. A small voice joined in, fragile and uncertain, but unmistakable. "You are my sunshine. My only sunshine." The entire room froze. Jack's head snapped up. Rachel stopped playing. Caleb sat motionless, his lips slightly parted, eyes wide with fear at the silence he had created. Jack's breath caught. His chest felt tight, like someone had tied a rope around his ribs. "Caleb," he said, barely a whisper. The boy looked at him, face flushed, trembling. His fingers clenched the edge of his sketch pad. Jack rose slowly, not wanting to startle him. He knelt down in front of his son. "You sang." Caleb's mouth twitched. He nodded just once. Rachel stood beside the piano, tears glistening in her eyes. The other children said nothing. Somehow they understood this was sacred ground. Jack took Caleb's hands in his own rough palms, closing gently over small, cold fingers. "I'm so proud of you," he said. Caleb looked up, and in that look, Jack saw something more than a child's bravery. He saw healing. A piece of his boy had returned, carried on the back of a song. Without thinking, Jack pulled him into a hug, fierce and grateful. Caleb didn't resist. He buried his face into his father's shoulder and held on. No words were needed. After a long moment, Rachel stepped closer, knelt beside them. She didn't speak either, just rested a hand lightly on Caleb's back, as if anchoring the moment in place. Jack looked at her, and for a fleeting second, something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but something even more intimate. Recognition. The shared knowledge that a miracle had just taken place between them because of them. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the snow fell in slow spirals outside, Jack and Rachel stood by the fire in quiet reflection. "He hasn't sung since Lydia died," Jack said, voice low. "Not a word, not a note," Rachel nodded. "I didn't do that." "Yes, you did," she shook her head. I just played an old song, and you loved him," Jack said. Without asking for anything, that's more than most people ever do. Rachel looked away, blinking quickly. "You've loved him every single day, Jack." Even when he couldn't speak it back, that's why he could sing tonight. Jack swallowed hard. His throat ached in that way. It only did when he tried not to cry. He turned toward the guitar resting in the corner, silent, upright, waiting. For the first time in years, he walked over and picked it up. The strings felt unfamiliar beneath his fingers, stiff with disuse, but his hands remembered. Slowly, he strummed a soft chord. Then another. Rachel leaned against the edge of the table, arms folded, watching. "You gonna make me cry again?" she asked, half smiling. Jack chuckled. "I make no promises." He played a few simple bars of a lullaby, something old, Appalachian passed down from his father. Nothing flashy, nothing rehearsed, but it filled the cabin. And as he played, something uncoiled inside him. Not grief, but space. Space for something new. Not to replace Lydia. Nothing could, but to let something else live beside the ache. Hope Rachel stepped closer. "Keep going," she whispered. So he did. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Avery didn't feel like he was surviving winter anymore. He felt like he was singing it back to life. The sun came out the next morning, not just a brief flicker behind clouds, but a steady golden presence that turned the snow into glitter. The trees sparkled, icicles dripped like tiny chimes. And for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the mountain didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a playground. Jack stood outside the cabin with his hands on his hips, squinting toward the slope just past the tree line. It wasn't steep, but smooth enough, curved just right for a sled. "You ever been sledding?" he called over his shoulder. Rachel stepped out onto the porch, still tying her scarf, her cheeks already pink. With what sled? The luxury model made of splintered lumber and bungee cords. Jack grinned. "Hey, it's held together by faith and duct tape. Show some respect." The kids tumbled out behind her eyes, wide voices high with excitement. Even Caleb had a spark in his step that Jack hadn't seen in years. They gathered around the old wooden sled Jack had pieced together from salvaged barn planks and the base of a broken wheelbarrow. It looked ridiculous, but to the children, it might as well have been a sleigh from Santa's workshop. "All right," Jack said 2 at a time. "One adult, 1 kid." "I'm going with Mr. Jack," one of Rachel's girls shouted. "No fair, I called it first." Rachel leaned over to Jack and whispered, "Looks like you're popular now." Jack chuckled, surprised at the warmth that rose in his chest. "Guess I better not crash." Then, for the next hour, the mountain echoed with laughter, squeals, and the rhythmic crunch of boots climbing uphill. Rachel went down with her youngest screaming. The way, Jack took a turn with each of the kids, even Caleb, who hesitated for only a moment before nodding silently and climbing aboard. As the sled flew down the slope, the wind whipping their faces, Caleb threw his head back and laughed a full, unguarded laugh. Jack almost forgot to steer. By the time they headed back toward the cabin, everyone was covered in snow. Cheeks, flushed boots soaked through Rachel's hair, had escaped her hat, curling around her face in damp tendrils. Jack caught himself watching her, not just looking, but seeing her. Not just a mother, not just a survivor, a woman full of life strength. Possibility. Inside they peeled off layers and hung gloves near the fire. Rachel made hot cocoa, stirring it with the edge of a wooden spoon, as if she were conjuring something more important than warmth. Jack passed out mismatched mugs one by one. When the kids were finally settled with blankets and mugs in hand, Jack leaned against the kitchen counter and let out a long breath. "You know," he said, "I don't think this cabin's ever been that loud." Rachel smiled. "Good loud. The best kind." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the children lean against each other, sleepy and content. Then Rachel spoke, her voice quiet. "Do you ever wonder if it's okay to feel this?" Jack turned. This kind of happiness after loss. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the table, sat down, and motioned for her to join him. She did. He folded his hands. For a long time, I thought feeling happy again would mean I was betraying Lydia, that I was leaving something behind. Rachel nodded. I feel that too. About Dan, like if I build something new, it means what we had wasn't real. But it was real, Jack said. And so is this. She looked down at her mug. I'm scared to hope Jack was quiet, then said, Me too. The fire crackled in the corner. Outside, snow melted in slow, shimmering streams. Rachel raised her eyes to meet his. So what do we do? Jack's answer was simple. We keep sledding, we keep baking, we keep showing up. And if the hope gets too loud, we just let it. Rachel let out a soft laugh. You make it sound easy. It's not, Jack said. But maybe it's worth it. She didn't reply. Instead, she reached across the table, took his hand, and squeezed. And for a moment, that simple touch said everything. I see you. I trust you. I'm still afraid. But maybe I'm willing to believe again. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Jack stepped out onto the porch. The stars had returned, sharp and cold and endless. He breathed in the stillness, let it settle in his chest. Rachel joined him a minute later, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They stood there side by side, not speaking. Finally, Jack asked, What do you see when you look out there? Rachel thought a moment, then said, Something wild, but not dangerous anymore. Jack smiled. Yeah, that sounds right. She turned to him. What about you? He met her eyes, and after a pause said, I see a reason to stay. Rachel blinked, then nodded slowly. And in the silence that followed, nothing needed to be said, because sometimes love doesn't arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes gently on a sled, made of scrap wood with cocoa-stained mugs, and the sound of children laughing beneath a sky full of stars. The cold returned like an old friend, not cruel this time, just familiar. The snow no longer seemed to threaten. It lingered, blanketing the trees, softening the world Jack had come to expect its rhythm. But what he hadn't expected was the change in Caleb. It started subtly. A question here, a nod. There. A hand offered when the firewood stack needed refilling, a hum under his breath, as Rachel played softly on the piano. Then one morning, Jack woke to find Caleb already outside, lugging small logs from the shed to the porch, determined and red-faced with effort. Jack stepped out, boots crunching over the frost. You're up early, he said. Caleb didn't speak at first. He picked up another log, added it to the pile, then turned to face his father. I want to help you deliver the wood today. Jack's heart stopped for half a beat. For 2 years, Caleb had followed, shadowed, existed within arm's reach, but never volunteered. Never stepped forward on his own. You sure, Jack? Asked voice, gentler than he meant it. Caleb nodded. Jack gave a quiet smile. All right, dress warm. They hitched the sled behind the old pickup, loaded with fresh-cut logs wrapped in burlap. It was a ritual Jack had followed alone for months, delivering firewood to the elderly and shut-ins scattered along the ridgeline. He never took payment, just left the bundles sometimes with a note. That morning, Caleb rode beside him, hands tucked in borrowed gloves, his eyes scanning the trees as they passed. The first stop was an elderly couple. The Henleys, who lived in a cabin with a crooked chimney and a flag that hadn't been taken down since July. Jack knocked left, the wood stacked under the eaves, and waved when Mrs. Henley peeked through the curtain. You do this for free? Caleb asked as they drove off. Jack glanced at his son. Not for free. For reasons, Caleb waited. Jack continued. People helped me when I didn't deserve it, when I didn't ask. And some of them didn't even know my name. Caleb looked down at his hands. Like you helped, Rachel. Jack's fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. Yeah, like that, they drove in silence for a while. Then Caleb said, It matters. Jack glanced sideways. What does? This Caleb gestured at the bundled firewood. The doing, Jack's throat tightened. His son wasn't just speaking again. He was understanding. At the final stop, a widow named Mabel, whose roof Jack had patched the previous fall. Jack turned off the engine and sat a moment longer. Want to carry it this time? He asked. Caleb nodded. They each took a bundle and walked side by side toward the porch. Mabel greeted them with her usual half-scowl, half-smile. Looks like you brought reinforcements, she teased, eyes twinkling as she handed Caleb a caramel. Good help's hard to find, Jack replied. Caleb blushed, but said clearly, Thank you. Back at the truck, Jack exhaled into the cold. You did good today. Caleb looked up. So did you? Jack chuckled. You always this wise? Or is it just the sugar? Caleb smirked, and for the first time Jack saw Lydia in him so vividly it hurt. Not the pain of grief, the ache of memory softened by time. They rode back in easy silence, the kind that only forms between two people who have done something worthwhile together. When they returned, the cabin was filled with the scent of baked apples and cinnamon. Rachel stood at the stove, cheeks flushed, apron dusted with flour. Well, she asked as they came in. Mission accomplished, Jack said, unwinding his scarf. Caleb walked past her, gently placing a caramel on the kitchen counter. From Mrs. Mabel, he said. Rachel looked at Jack, brows raised. He spoke. Jack said softly. He really spoke. She pressed a hand to her mouth, emotion catching in her throat. Jack leaned against the wall, watching his son hang up his coat like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. That night after dinner, Jack pulled out the guitar again. He strummed quietly by the fire, while Rachel read aloud from an old book of poetry. The children listened for a while, then one by one drifted to sleep, their breathing rhythmic and peaceful. Rachel closed the book. Do you ever wonder if they'll remember this? Jack looked over. How could they not? She smiled. They might not remember the cold or the meals, but maybe they'll remember the singing, the laughter, the smell of wood smoke. Jack nodded, or the sound of a guitar played too slowly by a man who forgot half the chords. Rachel stood, walked toward him, and took the guitar gently from his hands. I think you remember just enough. She sat on the hearth and began to play, soft but warm, something old and steady. Jack watched her fingers, her profile, the way she lost herself in melody without needing to perform. After the song, there was silence. Then Jack said, I made a promise. This morning, Rachel turned. To who? To Caleb. To myself. That I'd never stop trying. Not just to survive, but to live. To be more. She watched him for a long beat. You already are, and he looked down. Then back at her. I want to be someone who can hold this. All of it. You them not just for a season. Rachel rose, slowly crossed the space between them and sat beside him on the floor. You already are, she repeated softer this time. Jack reached out, not with haste, not with desperation, but with the steadiness of someone who had built a fire from damp wood, who had watched silence break open like dawn. Their fingers touched, and nothing more needed to be said. Because sometimes promises aren't made with words. They're made with hands, with work, with a sled full of firewood and a heart full of hope. It happened on a Thursday, clear skies, windless air, and a hush across the forest. So still it felt sacred. Jack was splitting the last of the seasoned oak near the woodshed, Caleb beside him, handing over each log with practiced rhythm. The world had settled into something like peace. Then came the sound of tires crunching snow. Not the soft patter of deer, not the distant echo of wind. Rubber steel movement. Jack stopped mid-swing. He looked up, meeting Caleb's gaze wide-eyed and alert. The noise grew louder. Then a dust-coated SUV appeared at the base of the drive. It crept slowly, uncertainly toward the cabin. Jack's gut tightened. Visitors didn't come here. Not by accident. Rachel stepped out from the cabin a few moments later, drying her hands on a dish towel. She froze. From the SUV emerged a woman in a tailored winter coat and a clipboard in hand. Behind her, a man in a utility vest and city boots. Jack stepped forward, intercepting them. Halfway. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice steady. The woman smiled, practiced and efficient. "Mr. Avery, I'm Amanda Doyle, Social Placement Coordinator with the state of Idaho. We've been trying to locate a Rachel Whitmore and her children." Jack stiffened. Rachel appeared beside him, her voice calm but low. "That's me." Amanda blinked in surprise. "Well, we weren't expecting to find you this far off-grid. You've been marked as missing since November." Rachel crossed her arms. "I wasn't missing. I was surviving." Amanda shifted uncomfortably. "I understand. We're not here to cause trouble. But a community shelter in Boise raised concern when you didn't check back in. There was an employment contract waiting." Rachel's lips pressed tight. "The job was rescinded. No housing. No support." "Yes, well, the position reopened. The school is still willing to take you with housing. Full benefits, a pause, and placement in a permanent foster care program for the children if necessary." Jack felt Rachel sway just slightly beside him. The clipboard woman kept speaking. "We can arrange transportation by tomorrow morning. The state wants to support transitions like this, especially for vulnerable families." Rachel didn't speak. Her face had gone still, unreadable. Jack's voice was low. "She's not vulnerable?" Amanda blinked. "I beg your pardon. She's capable. She kept 4 kids alive through a snowstorm, fed them, taught them baked bread, out of next to nothing. Don't talk about her like she's someone to be placed. She's someone to be partnered with." Amanda looked unsure now. "Well, I'll give you space. We'll return tomorrow morning to hear your decision." They returned to the SUV and disappeared down the drive like a memory someone tried to bury too early. Inside the cabin, silence settled heavy. Rachel sat at the table, elbows resting on the worn wood, fingers pressed together. Jack stood across from her, not speaking. After a long moment, Rachel said, "It's a real offer." Jack nodded. "Housing, a job, a future." He nodded again. "And you think I should go?" "No," Jack said simply. "I think you should choose." She looked up. "What if I choose wrong?" Jack stepped closer, pulling out the chair across from her. "Then you'll still have done something braver than most." She let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. The thought of going back to that life she began, then paused. It's like asking me to live in someone else's house again. Someone else's name, their schedule, their limits. And the thought of staying. Rachel looked around at the hearth, the drying herbs over the window, the sound of children giggling from the back room. "It scares me more," she admitted. "Because I want it." Jack reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "Then fight for it." That night, she didn't sleep. Jack knew, because he didn't either. They both sat by the fire, not speaking, letting the flames whisper what their mouths couldn't yet say. At some point past midnight, Caleb came out from the bedroom carrying his sketch pad. He handed it to Rachel. On the page was a drawing of the cabin, but not the way it looked now. It had been expanded. The porch was wider. There was a garden, a clothesline, smoke from the chimney. 5 kids playing in the yard, a guitar propped against a rocking chair. And in the center, 2 adults, drawn taller than the rest, standing side by side. Rachel stared at the drawing for a long time, then whispered, "He sees it too." The next morning, Amanda and her assistant returned. Rachel met them on the porch, the folder of paperwork still unopened. "I'm not going," she said. Before Amanda could speak, Amanda frowned. "Are you sure? This is a stable option?" Rachel nodded. "This is my option." Amanda sighed. "You're not legally bound to remain here, but the state can't provide future assistance if you forego. I'm not asking for assistance. I'm asking to live where I'm seen, where my kids are safe, where they're already home." Amanda studied her. Then softly, "Most people don't turn down rescue." Rachel smiled. "That's because most people haven't already been saved." Amanda hesitated, then nodded. "I'll note your file. I hope it works out for you." As the car pulled away, Rachel turned to find Jack watching from the edge of the steps. She walked toward him, stood close. "It's done," she said. Jack nodded. "They wanted to give us a future," she added. He looked into her eyes. "You already built one." And in that moment, nothing was missing. Not a contract, not a house, not even the past. Just the sound of wind in the trees, the warmth of her hand in his, and the knowing that sometimes the most powerful promise you can make is the one you never thought you'd be brave enough to keep. Spring didn't arrive all at once in the mountains. It crept in gently, like someone unsure if they were welcome. The snow softened, icicles loosened their grip, and patches of green peeked through the frost, like shy smiles. Jack was in the garden, knees deep in damp soil, coaxing stubborn roots to make room for the seeds Rachel had been collecting all winter. He looked up as Rachel stepped onto the porch with 2 steaming mugs, one in each hand. Her hair pulled back with a faded ribbon, her cheeks pink from the breeze. "You're starting early," she said, handing him a mug. Jack took it, nodding toward the raised beds. "If I don't, these carrots will be the size of toothpicks." By July, she laughed a sound that had grown more frequent lately, fuller. It no longer came out like an accident. It belonged here, now. Behind her, the cabin door swung open, and the children spilled out like light through windows, chasing, giggling, bundled in mismatched jackets. Caleb walked just behind them, holding a clipboard and a small chalkboard Rachel had salvaged from town. "Are we really doing school outside today?" one of Rachel's boys asked. Rachel nodded. "If you can do long division while swatting at flies, you'll be just fine in life." Jack grinned as she wrangled the group toward the large, flat rock near the pines, their unofficial classroom when the weather allowed. Caleb lingered back. Jack noticed. "You okay?" The boy nodded, then after a pause said, "I want to teach them something." Jack's eyebrows lifted. "Yeah." Caleb glanced down. "A song. One Rachel taught me. I thought maybe I could teach it to the others." Jack crouched, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's a great idea." Caleb looked up. You think Mom would have liked that Jack swallowed. He didn't tear up anymore when Lydia was mentioned, but sometimes, like now, he felt her in the air, gentle, present, approving. "I think she'd be proud," Jack said. "Of both of us," Caleb smiled, and it didn't look hesitant anymore. It looked whole. Later that evening after dinner, and dishes, and the routine chorus of brush your teeth, and one more story. Jack and Rachel sat on the porch steps watching the stars blink alive. The guitar rested between them. Rachel plucked a few quiet notes, her fingers slow and deliberate. Jack leaned back on his palms. "I never thought I'd end up here." She glanced sideways, and now he exhaled, watching his breath curl in the night air. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." A comfortable silence settled between them. Then Rachel said, "I've been thinking. That always gets me nervous." She smiled. "I want to stay. Not just for now. Not until fall, or until we run out of firewood. I want to stay for real." Jack turned to her, something steady rising in his chest. "You already have." She searched his face, eyes shining. "You think we can do this? 5 kids. 1 cabin, a garden that may or may not survive the elk." He reached over gently, took her hand. "We've already done harder." Rachel looked down at their joined hands, then back up. "I don't want to be someone you rescued," she said. "I want to be someone you build with," Jack nodded. "Good, because I don't need someone to rescue. I need someone to keep walking with me through mud, through snow, through carrot-sized failures." She laughed softly, then grew quiet again. "Do you think it's possible to make a forever home out of a place that started as survival?" Jack looked at the cabin, the dim light from the windows, the laughter still echoing faintly from inside. "I think it already is." The next morning, Jack woke early. The sun had barely risen, and the frost still clung to the edges of the porch. He stepped out, coffee in hand, and found Rachel already there, wrapped in a blanket, her face turned toward the mountains. Without turning, she said, "There's something about this place. It doesn't just hold you. It teaches you how to stay." Jack sat beside her. "That's why I couldn't leave, even when I wanted to." Rachel turned to him. "Thank you for not giving up. On this place. On Caleb. On yourself." He looked down. "It wasn't noble. At first it was just all I could do, but now," he met her eyes, "now it's what I choose to do." They sat in silence, the kind that comes only after deep pain has been met with deeper love. Then Rachel pulled something from her coat pocket, a small folded sheet of paper. Jack opened it. It was a hand-drawn floor plan, rough in pencil. The cabin expanded, a second bedroom, a larger kitchen, even a front porch swing. "Caleb drew it," she said. He said, "If this is forever, it needs more room." Jack smiled. "He's not wrong." Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder. "So do we build it?" Jack wrapped an arm around her, pulled her close. "We build it together." That spring, they added windows to the north wall. In summer, they tilled a larger patch for beans and sunflowers. By fall, the old woodshed had become a new bedroom, and the porch swing swayed gently in the twilight. No one made grand declarations. There was no white dress or ringing bells, but every time Jack handed Rachel a mug of coffee, or every time she kissed Caleb's forehead goodnight, or every time the children danced to an old song by the fireplace, it was a vow. A quiet, enduring vow that said, "We are home, we are enough, and the fire will not go out again." If this story speaks to your heart, we'd love to know where in the world are you watching from. It's always a joy to see how kindness connects us across towns, states, and even oceans. And if you haven't yet, feel free to subscribe, not just for more stories, but to be part of a community that still believes in hope, in healing, and in the quiet power of love. Thank you truly for spending your time here with us today. We don't take it for granted, not for a single moment.